Hello everyone, and welcome to Hill Street. Today's story is The Police Won't Even Let Me Talk About This by Ninstrom Writes. If you end up enjoying this story, please leave a like, and if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street and let me know how I'm doing in the comments. Now, let's get to this nightmare. I don't know a lot about internet security. I bought a VPN with a prepaid Visa gift card, and I'm using a public library's Wi-Fi. I hope that will be enough. I revised this story a dozen times in my head. I'm not sure what I want to try to accomplish by posting this. Maybe a warning, and maybe someone will actually believe me. No one I actually know seems to. Hopefully this doesn't get back to me, because like I said, the cops told me to never talk about this again. I won't be giving specific locations. I was raised religious. My town has more than 15 churches for a relatively small population. Several years ago, I was baptized into my church. Everyone was so proud. I got dozens of cards and family wishing me well. They all thought I'd grow up to be a pastor or something. Independent of my church's instructions, I decided as a kind of exploration, I'd go visit other churches. There are dozens of different sects in my religion, each with distinct belief systems under one banner. There are Lutherans, Protestants, Brethren. I thought it would be good to see what they thought was different and why they believed what they believe. It was my senior year in high school when that started. I took my mom's car on trips to the nearest city to explore their religions in peace, without anyone from my church asking about it. I only went every 3 weeks or so, ditfully attending church the other times, plus youth groups and Bible studies on Thursday nights. I even ventured into the Sikh temple one time. Nice folks. Eventually, gas prices started dinging into my savings too much, and the roads were beginning to get covered with ice and snow. I thought that it would be better if I could get away with exploring locally. So far, I hadn't learned a ton, but it was interesting, and it felt a little daring. I didn't hate anything about my structured life, but having one secret felt, I don't know how to describe it. It made the day-to-day easier. I managed to sneak into another 4 churches locally. The Mennonite Church, the Catholic Church, the Alliance, and the Church of the Communion. I had planned for a 5th one, the only one in town that didn't have a prominent sign outside. I usually drove past it on the way to my regular church, and I only ever saw 2 or 3 cars parked out in front. Maybe it was a church that only a few old people liked. I'm not sure what denomination they were. The only marking that made me aware that it was a church was the big cross on top of the building. There were other symbols on the door, but I wasn't familiar with their symbolism at all. Maybe it was a Freemason church. I didn't know much about them. I didn't end up visiting the mystery church, however. After doing this for my entire senior year, other worries cropped up. I began looking at universities and Bible colleges, unsure which way to go. I consulted with my church leaders, my parents, even my little brother. What did they think was right for me? The thought of the 5th church quietly left my mind, and other, more pressing things had my attention. After considering for a while, I decided the only thing to do for choosing my post-secondary education was to repeat my idea from before, visit in person, and get a feel for the campus. My first stop was a university on the far side of the city, on the outskirts, far enough away that I wouldn't get random visits from my parents, close enough that I could come home for summer or Christmas break. Winter driving was my least favorite thing. Every hour I spent on the road towards that school was stressful and scary. My knuckles were white from how hard I gripped the steering wheel. I was using a route that skirted the city, so it wasn't very popular. I kept wondering how long it would be before another car came around and found me. If the harsh winds blew me off the road, I should have brought an emergency blanket. When I finally arrived, the sun had already set, 4 p.m., and it was pitch black. Another reason I hated winter. I pulled over as soon as I reached a parking lot near my prospective university. But if it was this dark, what was the point? The roads had delayed me for over 2 hours. Google told me where the closest and cheapest hotel was. I hadn't expected to spend the night, but it seemed necessary now. Luckily, I had enough money for it. I drove into the parking lot and started to get a bad feeling. Something about how dark and plain this satellite town was unnerved me. Or maybe it was just that I was, probably for the first time in my life, completely on my own. I hesitated for a moment, but logically, this was my only option. The hotel itself seemed to be nestled between a workshop of some kind and a storage facility. The building was made of painted white bricks or cylinder blocks, I don't know which, and the small sign outside was all I had to assure me that this was the right place. It certainly didn't look like most hotels I'd been to. I didn't have an overnight bag, so I just went in with my credit card and an ID already out for the clerk. The front desk was empty when I got inside. The lobby was well lit and looked more or less clean, minus some muddy boot prints. "Hello?" I called out. A tired-looking woman came from around the corner. "Can I help you?" she asked. She was thin and getting on in her years. Her gray hair was cropped short, barely going past her ears. "I'd like a room, if you have any available." She seemed surprised. "Oh yes we do. Sorry, we usually cater mostly to road crews and construction workers, that kind of thing. We rarely get guests apart from that, but you're welcome to it. We have a packed lunch in the mornings. Are you staying just for tonight?" "Yes, I hesitated, unsure, and despite it being out of character for me, I decided to lie. "I'm just passing through. Roads might be closed tomorrow if this snow keeps up," the woman cautioned me, taking my ID and credit card. "Lord knows," I replied reflexively. I'd had this kind of conversation many times. Yes, true. So, single occupancy?" she asked. "Yep." Her gaze fell on me and stayed just for a moment too long. "Okay." She looked down and continued to type away. "You're a bit of a trip away from home for a night like this." I didn't reply. Couldn't think of anything to say. "If you're stuck here tomorrow, do you want us to hold the room for you?" "Sure, might be a good idea." I made a mental note to ask either mom or dad for a quick e-transfer. "Alright then, I've got you in 111, just at the end of the hall." She handed me a slightly bent key and disappeared around the corner again. As I walked away, I thought I heard her speaking to a walkie-talkie or radio, but I wasn't sure. The room was bad. The bed was firm. There was only one pillow, and the TV only had pay-to-view movies. I spent the night texting friends and family, then tried to sleep. It didn't go super well. When I awoke, it must have been 8 in the morning, though my phone was now dead. My phone could charge in the car, at least. As I made my way out, the clerk stopped me. "Excuse me," she called out. "You're still here? Don't they give you time off?" I asked, smiling. "Not so much. We're short-staffed. I thought I should let you know that the roads are closed. You might be able to get around town okay if you have winter tires, but don't try the highways. They aren't safe." "Okay," I said, disappointed. "Thanks for the warning. Here's your bagged breakfast. What will you do with your day now?" she asked. "Well, nothing, I suppose. Take a look around mostly. If you'd like, I'm about to take my children to church. We're having potluck today and doing a baptism." Potluck meant free food. "Oh, well, that might be good," I replied. I didn't want to get reamed out for using too much of my parents' money. My bottom was still sore from when I'd ordered room service when I was 7. "What kind of church do you attend?" "Oh, we aren't big into labels. We're too small of a church to do that kind of thing." "Okay, should I just follow you?" I asked. "Sure, I'll leave in about 5 minutes." I went and warmed up my car, and then followed the clerk firstly to her house, where 3 children, I'd have guessed were 12, 14, and 17, were waiting patiently. I waved at them, but they didn't respond. Maybe they didn't see. We arrived at the church soon after, and I was surprised by how familiar it was. A large building with a cross on top, some symbols etched into the door, and no other markings. This was my mysterious church. After shutting off the car, I commented to the clerk, "I have one of these churches in my hometown. I always wanted to visit, but, well, my regular church took a lot of time." "Oh, did you now?" she asked, not quite looking at me. The service went as most services do. There was singing of familiar hymns, a sermon, and then the baptism. Theirs was baptism by submersion in a little indoor pool. Overall, it seemed a pleasant affair. Everyone congregated in a side room for lunch, which everyone had contributed to, apart from myself. But as a guest, that was expected. The food was a touch bland, but otherwise pretty normal. I shook a few hands. There were maybe 40 people in total attending. In typical fashion, I forgot their names as soon as I learned them. Mostly they asked the usual question, where I was from, what I was doing, what I wanted to take in university, that kind of thing. The clerk and her family must have left at some point. I hadn't noticed. I stayed the appropriate amount of time to be polite, then left for the university I was scoping out. I walked it nearly all day. Though it was a Sunday, the doors were open, and more than just faculty were roaming the halls. I asked a few students I saw what the dorm was like, if they liked their professors, and ultimately felt that it was a solid candidate. The sun had set again. It was already 4 p.m. I returned to my hotel room, and once again, the same clerk was there. She was standing at the desk this time, watching. It felt like she'd been waiting for me. "What's up?" I asked. "Oh, I just wanted to be sure you hadn't left, because the roads are so bad," she added. "Right. Well, hopefully tomorrow they'll have gotten the plows out," I said cheerfully, and returned to my room. I wasn't ready to sleep yet. Nowhere near, but my phone only offered so much entertainment. I appraised my family on my activities and tried not to burn through too much data. I let myself sort of drift in between sleeping and being awake, mostly trying to kill time. Then, I'm not sure, I think I remember someone quietly entering my room, or maybe a group of people. I tried to fight, to call for help. They punched me in my stomach, then in the head. Something was forced into my mouth. It was a yellow-stained rag. It tasted indescribably awful. It burned my tongue, and when I tried to breathe, I could feel the nauseous acid attacking my throat and lungs. My body went limp soon after, but I was still aware of what was happening. My heart was beating out of my chest, but I couldn't do anything to resist. I was carried out, with one person holding my arms and the other carrying my legs. The fire exit was propped open. No alarm was sounding. At the end of the hall, watching, was the clerk. She held the radio in her hands. She made no move to help me. Her gaze was so blankly neutral. I thought she was a statue. I was loaded into a vehicle. We drove for a short while. We arrived somewhere. It may have been the church, but it also may not have been. The people who took me were speaking in hushed but fervent tones. My body would not answer my pleas to fight. We descended some stairs. It was dark, but with each step, I felt myself coming closer to some kind of dark presence. Something hungry was waiting for me. I still don't have the words to describe it. Finally, we came to a door. It was marked with familiar sigils. I could hear something moving behind the door. Something big. Something that was breathing heavily. Through my haze in my mind, I knew that if I passed through that door, I would not be coming back out. My body still wasn't obeying me perfectly, but if there was a time to fight, it was right now. I did my closest approximation of kicking out, thrashing, and tried to scream, but the cloth filled my mouth muted me almost entirely, like screaming into a pillow. Just as the door creaked open from inside, I got loose of the man holding my legs, and I caught sight of what was waiting for me. Whatever it was tall, probably 7 feet tall. There was a bulbous gray head, adorned with black eyes like a fly, and molted gray-white skin. Its mouth was large, and had yellowish drool oozing from its sharp teeth like pus. The smell wafted from within was just like what they doused the cloth with to paralyze me. I had no name for it. It was like a troll had fused with a human's body, but twice as disgusting. It was breathing heavily in anticipation. I nudged the man in front of me forward, causing him to collide with the thing. Then I heard him scream. The person behind me dropped me, then punched me in the back of the head, sending me reeling. Through the pain and whatever drug they had given me, I remained surprised I didn't black out. The second guy tried to grab his friend, and I ran as fast as I could, which wasn't very fast. I hobbled mostly, leaning on walls for support. Other people heard the commotion from within the building, and I heard I was being followed. I ran. I wasn't wearing shoes, just socks. It was freezing cold on my feet, but I stayed on the ice to not leave tracks. I eventually felt that I had lost my captures. After that, I knocked on several doors in town, until finally, someone let me in. I was hysterical. I couldn't tell them what had happened, and they eventually kicked me out, telling me I was a drug addict and I wasn't thinking straight. I had already tossed out the rag they stuffed my mouth with, though I couldn't remember when. I made my way back to my car, trying to keep to the alleys and shadows. When I finally saw it, I sprinted to it and tried to start it. It was cold, and my car was struggling to turn over. From within that crappy hotel, I caught the icy cold glare of the hotel clerk, with one hand holding her radio to her ear. She was speaking into it, telling the others where I was. Finally, the car started, and I ripped out of the parking lot as fast as I could, ice covering the windshield and everything. I'm still amazed I didn't die on the drive home. I was speeding. My hands were trembling. I couldn't get the tears out of my eyes. The roads were not cleared, salted, or even packed down. Somehow, I made it. I collapsed at home, my body shaking and twitching, in the early hours of the morning. My family asked me tons of questions. I hadn't processed the whole thing yet, so I dodged it all as much as I could. I kept it to myself until they turned on the news. Word of a visiting university student having some kind of psychotic break was on every local news station. Not just the TV, but the radio. And on Monday, it was in the papers too. My parents knew these stories were about me, but I kept quiet, all the while feeling like I was being watched and followed. I feel that if I told them today, they'd more likely believe what the news told them. I've waited too long now. I haven't been able to tell anyone what happened that day. I tried going to the police, but as soon as I walked into the building, 2 officers were staring directly at me, arms crossed. One of them was firmly shaking his head no. The other looked furious that I was there. He began walking towards me, and I turned and left without a word. I didn't remember seeing them at the church, but there were probably all kinds of gaps in my memory. Or maybe they'd been bought out. I had no way of knowing. I won't be able to respond to any comments. I won't be checking this thread in the future. I won't be using this account again. I just hope anyone who reads this learns to read the warning signs. Don't visit the quiet churches. Don't go to the cheapest hotel. Trust your gut and stay away from the basement.